Well, again, thank you for joining us this morning for our morning briefing. I'm Jeff Catula, president of the Washington County Chamber of Commerce. And today we're going to discuss cyber security. I'd like to welcome our guests this morning, Frank Botta from the Lynch Law Group, Justin Domachowski from Defy, and Will Simpson from the Simpson McCready Group. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Jeff.
Morning.
We're looking for a wonderful presentation today, and I know you have a PowerPoint presentation and to go over with our audience, but I also want to remind our audience that we will be taking questions near the end of our presentation this morning, and please use the Q&A function to ask our panelists questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Frank. Frank, thank you.
Jeff, thanks so much for having us in the Washington County Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much.
That's the stark reality and the reaction that a corporation has whenever they're breached. And this is one of the biggest concerns corporations are having right now. Let's go to the basic definition of ransomware. It's an ever-evolving form of malware designed to encrypt files on a device, rendering any files and systems that rely on them unusable. And then the malicious actors go and do their thing, and they ask for tons and tons of money. It's real, and it's something which we'll hear from our experts how they're being addressed. In 2021, there were nearly 500 million ransomware attacks. In the third quarter, there was 190 million. From between 2020 and 2021, there was 130% year-over-year increase. And there are 22 ransomware attacks every second of the day. Close to my industry in the legal community, the American Bar Association did a study back in 2020, and about 29% of the law firms reported a security breach. And 1 in 5 firms were not sure if they ever had been breached, but 36% reported past malware infections in their systems. One of the most notorious cases in the legal community was in 2019, and where a cybercrime gang, which calls itself Reveal, stole nearly a terabyte of data from a New York law firm who has a who's list of clients. Initially, the demand was 21 million, and later it doubled to 42 million. It published over 2 gigabytes of Lady Gaga's contracts and other data on a dark web as proof of the compromise. Most recently, this past month, May 5th, Lincoln College blamed the cyber attack as one of the reasons that it closed. This institution was 157 years old. In December 2021, the ransomware attack thwarted admission activities and hindered access to all institutional data. In 2020, 14 U.S. colleges or universities and school districts have been hit by ransomware demands, and they're continuing to increase. One of the most known breaches was in 2021, April 2021, where Reveal again publicly released proprietary blueprints for a new Apple device and threatened to publish files unless the company agreed to pay the ransom demand of $50 million by the next month. And then we go to the most publicized breach in May of 2021, the Colonial Pipeline. Russia linked a cybercrime group known as DarkSide demanded 4.4 million ransomware dollars shortly after the hack. It was the first time that Colonial shut down the entirety of the gasoline pipeline system in over 57 years. We're very excited to have Justin Domachowski, the founder and president of Defy Security, join us. Justin is nationally known in the cybersecurity industry and has spoken nationally, but has offices right here in South Point. Justin's going to help us better understand how to prevent, protect, and react to data breaches. Justin?
Frank, thanks for the intro. And we appreciate the opportunity for Defy to be here today to support the local business community. I think Frank did a good job at really laying a foundation. Attacks are consistently happening. A lot of our customers that we sit down with to talk through, the question is, do you think we'll be attacked? Do you think we'll see a breach? And the response has always been, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So currently on the screen, you'll see a bunch of data points. And one of the biggest concerns that we get is a lot of customers say, hey, we just don't have the budget. But when you look at minimizing a budget, you start from an investment perspective, there's a few things that you can do. If you look at the attacks that take place, over 65% of those are from an internal click on an email, also known as phishing, or it takes place what we say with inside the walls. So if you begin to invest in the current security infrastructure, that could start off with protecting your endpoint. An endpoint could be a computer, be an iPad, be a phone, any device that you have access to IP or email that would come from internal of your environment or external. There's different assessments that you can do. Those assessments can begin around $2,500. So I know we have small, medium, and large business on the call today. So I don't want you to think that there's this massive cost to just assess where your company is today. As Frank stated, Defy's local here in South Point. We're a global company. We have a ton of resources locally here in the area. We'd be happy to have a chat. There's no cost with that. We're happy to kind of assess where you're at today. The biggest thing is we encourage customers to put some control in place. After you put those controls in place, we help you identify policies. When you begin to enforce the policies, it lets you know how your users are going to behave. Then we talk about training your staff. What usually happens is a net new person comes into the environment. They don't know of certain files they're not able to touch or use. A lot of times they then get sent outside the environment. We want to help protect that because that introduces the company to a great risk. There's additional regulations that come as well. A lot of those can be found on local government sites, and they'll literally lay out plans to help you understand some of the steps you can take to be protective. What's even more interesting is we talk about investing in the right infrastructure, is there was a survey done by Accenture the end of last year. 78% of CISOs, as CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer, as well as data privacy officers, they have found it's 78% higher that remote workers are causing issues. A lot of the time, a remote worker goes to a local coffee shop, a Starbucks, a library. A lot of those environments already have malware or have some kind of ransomware on their current devices. They then jump onto the current device that the employee uses. When that employee then connects back to the mothership, being where they work, it begins to infect the other computers. 65% of organizations have seen a massive uptick with attacks during the pandemic. It's interesting, we had a conversation a little before we started this. If you look at the adversaries, there's two main things they're after. They're after money, which is the ransom payment they would like to make, but they're also after IP. Westinghouse, a few years back, probably 10, 12 years back, they had something called the AP1000. It was the generator that they made to create electricity. When that was stolen, it was stolen so somebody could reproduce at a lower cost. If you go to YouTube or Google today and Google that, there's another country that makes a similar module to that at basically half the cost. What we're encouraging our customers and potential customers to do is really understand the risk of the value of the assets you're trying to protect. So as we go through this today, we're gonna have some questions at the end. We'd welcome those questions. And again, we're here to help in any way that we can. Next up, we have Will Simpson from Simpson & McCready. Well, we appreciate you being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone. And yeah, I'm Will Simpson, Simpson McCready. We're an insurance brokerage firm. We're based in downtown, and one of our focus areas, one of our specialties is placing cyber insurance for our clients. So I wanted to talk today about some of the different incidents we've seen in the news over the past couple months. Also wanted to talk about how you can prepare for responding to a cyber attack. And then finally, I want to talk about what cyber insurance is and how you can go about getting it. So to start, just talking about some of the recent cyber incidents we've seen in the news. If you look at this slide, you can see all these companies or organizations are very high profile. You probably recognize all the different names, and some of the more notable ones I would say would be on the data breach side. So Microsoft and Okta our organization uses Microsoft Office 365. We use Windows. I'm sure almost every single organization on the call today has some sort of Microsoft product. But Okta is also a cybersecurity vendor. They provide two-factor authentication services. So they both had an incident back in March where hackers were able to get in and access critical systems or steal customer information. So that is really alarming, I would say. On the ransomware side, a couple of the more high-profile ones we've seen, the San Francisco 49ers had a ransomware attack actually on Super Bowl weekend of this year, where they had sensitive financial information from the last couple of years stolen, and it'll probably get disclosed online. The other ones we saw, Bridgestone and Toyota, you could Google this. They both had bad ransomware attacks where they actually had to shut down their production facilities for a period of time, so they weren't able to operate in certain areas of the country. So I put this slide together more to point out that if you think about how much money these organizations are spending on cybersecurity and what type of policies and procedures they have in place, and they still have an incident, then every single organization is a target and has the potential to be breached. So so that kind of leads into what can you do to prevent a cyber attack, or how can you respond to one if you are affected by one? So one of the biggest things you can do is have a response plan in place. And you want to have a written plan. You want to have it, printed out and in an accessible area, because what we've seen is if you are affected by a bad ransomware claim, you might not have access to your network. You might not be able to get to a file that you have saved on your computer. So you want to have something printed out, and that plan should really outline how are you going to respond if your organization's affected. Who are you going to call? Who within the organization is going to respond? So are you going to get the CEO involved? Are you going to get the CISO involved? Do you want to reach out to your law firm? Do you reach out to your insurance broker? And what we found is, the best plans are ones that you test on an annual basis. And when you test those plans, you want to involve the people who are responsible for responding. So if your plan calls for, your CEO to get involved, you want to make sure that the CEO is involved in the testing of that plan. And you can also reach out to the different vendors you work with and have them looped in on that, annual exercise. So if you, work with a law firm, let's say you work with, Frank, you want to involve them in the testing, because you'll find as you test the plan that there's some confusion about how to respond, who you're going to reach out to first. So if you test it, you have a higher likelihood of responding, quickly and more effectively if you do have some sort of incident. And you want to partner with the right vendors. So Frank and Justin have obviously specialize in this area as well and provide a lot of resources. From an insurance standpoint, we work with clients on recommendations with cyber insurance. There are also a lot of firms out there that specialize in pre-breach services. So there are actually firms out there that you can talk to about, drafting PR statements or, different documents in preparation for having a potential breach. And the resources out there are actually, quite strong because there's so many different organizations that are affected by this. So would highly recommend that you look at different vendors in advance. You also want to work with your IT firm. Your IT firm can do an analysis of your network, your cybersecurity controls, and they can point out different vulnerabilities that you might have. They can recommend different tools or software that you can put in place that can help strengthen your posture. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but cyber insurance is really key for a lot of businesses these days. The policies that you can get are very comprehensive, and they will reimburse for a lot of costs and expenses that you might have if you're affected by an incident. But they also provide a lot of these vendor resources. So what we've found is that a lot of these insurance companies partner with the different law firms, breach response firms, and they can give you discounted rates or complimentary services as a policyholder. So I would highly recommend that you at least look into this and have a conversation with your broker. We're happy to talk to you if you don't have a broker, or if you are looking for someone who works in the space. But we'll get into the different coverages within cyber insurance in a second. And then the last things I wanted to highlight here. So Justin talked about this, but regular training for employees is really key. We found that, the common example is, an employee gets an email from the CEO or the CFO asking to wire money to a customer or a bank account. And it turns out that it's, a criminal that's, faking an email account and trying to social engineer an employee. So you want to make sure that employees are aware of these types of schemes and are, double and triple checking, whether that's, calling the person who's, sending the email just to make sure that it's a legitimate request. And then strong controls go hand in hand with that. So backing up critical data or systems that you have, we found that if you back up information on a daily or a weekly basis, if you're affected by a ransomware attack, you can get back up and running quickly, and you might even avoid having to make the ransom payment because you won't have to, pay the hacker to get your system back up and running. The other things you can do, multi-factor authentication is really key. An example of that would be if you ever log into a website and it sends you a text message asking you to enter a code. That's just an extra step that you can take that would, potentially slow a hacker down or prevent them from getting into your network. And then access controls. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what employees have access to what information within your systems. If you have, sensitive customer records or, proprietary information, and you only want a handful of employees having access to that, you want to make sure that an intern or a low-level employee isn't able to get in there based on how your network's set up. So those are things that we talk about with our clients, and those are a lot of the weak points that lead to breaches and different cyber incidents that we've seen. So from a cyber insurance standpoint, what does it cover? Like I said, the policies are very comprehensive. The one of the main things that it covers is data breach response. So if you're affected by a breach, it's going to cover the cost of notifying all your customers that you've had a breach and disclose their information. It's also going to provide liability coverage if you're sued from customers or employees for disclosing that sensitive information. Data restoration. So what we found with a lot of ransomware attacks is, the hacker gets into your network, they lock everyone out. And if you don't pay the ransom, they threaten to destroy systems or data. So if you have to work with an IT firm to replace or restore data or systems, it's going to cover that expense, which can be very costly and take a significant amount of time. It's also going to pay for the actual ransom payment. So a lot of policies will pay up to the policy limit for a ransom. So if a hacker gets in and they demand, $500,000 to unlock your network, the policy could pay up to the full $500,000. And we've also found that going back to that point about different vendors, the insurance companies work with firms that specialize in handling the negotiations for the ransom, so they can actually talk down the demand from the hacker. So we had an incident last year where the initial demand was $1 million, but the firm that the insurance company worked with was able to talk them down to $500,000, and so a $500,000 payment was made, and that was fully covered under the policy. So that can be a huge advantage of having a policy. If you don't have coverage in place, you're talking about cutting a check for $500,000. So a policy that costs a few $1,000s can go a long way. And then a couple other things in here. So business interruption. If any of your organizations are manufacturers or have some sort of production facility, if you have a bad attack like Bridgestone or Toyota, and you're forced to shut down for a period of time, the policy can actually reimburse you for lost net income. If you can't produce inventory, you can't sell that inventory, the policy could actually pay to cover what money you would have made if you were producing the inventory. And then the last two on here, funds transfer fraud and social engineering. I was talking about that example with CEOs and CFOs. If an employee receives an email from someone asking to wire money out, the policy can actually reimburse you if an employee accidentally sends a wire transfer to a criminal, or if a hacker is able to convince a bank to wire money out of your account based on fraudulent instruction. We found that the policies will reimburse up to $250,000 for a situation like that. So that's just a quick overview of it. We get a lot of questions about, how to get a policy. So really the process is filling out an application, and the application will ask different questions around, policies and procedures your organization would have in place. Once we get that application back, we send it out to the, different companies that offer cyber insurance. And then we solicit quotes, and based on the responses we get back, we'll do a comprehensive analysis and make a recommendation to you on what policy would be most competitive from a price and coverage standpoint. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. My colleagues, John Rudolph and Derek Gallagher, also are involved with the chamber, and some of you might be familiar with them. So we're always happy to help, but would definitely be interested in taking any questions along with, Justin and Frank.
Well, we have some time, so let's go into some discussions between the panel here. With the political climate being what it is there heightened concerns with cyber attacks today?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it consistently, right? As midterm elections come up, right? A lot of people want to see what are people talking about within their chat, within their email, even within their texting. One of the things that we encourage even our internal employees to do is, one of the most common thing we've seen really uptick now is text saying, this is so-and-so, this is Frank from Lynch Law Firm, just have a quick question. Can you click on this link and it'll call me. A lot of people, like over 75% of people click on those links, right?
Yeah.
So those are going to start coming up here the next few months. And it's interesting. One of the questions was, is it okay to touch upon
Sure.
that? One of the questions was, what are some of the examples of ways that attackers can gain access to your system/data? We see different attacks for different verticals. One of the other most common thing we see is specific to like a UPS or FedEx email. Some of my family members every now and then will say, hey, I got an email from FedEx saying my package will be delivered. Please click on this to track. Should I click? And my question is, well, did you order anything? Right? If you didn't order anything, obviously it's going to, initiate malware or ransomware and put on the computer. So it's just simple questions that we ask ourselves before we click on something, forward something, or even open an attachment. But to your initial question, I think we've seen, those pickups, especially as we're coming up on midterms.
Yeah,
I think I was going to say the other thing that we've noticed is there's been a lot of press around the Russia invasion in Ukraine, because when this happened a couple years ago and Russia entered another territory over there, they launched a lot of cyber attacks specifically towards Ukraine, but it affected a lot of different companies because it was kind of a blanket attack. So there's definitely a heightened alert from a cyber insurance standpoint, because a lot of the companies think that they're going to be a big rise in ransomware claims, especially if Russia retaliates against the US for, our response. We could see Russia trying to target a lot of companies over here. So we could definitely see a rise in claims and attacks in the coming months and years.
And what kind of increases have you seen in written policies that your group has handled for cybersecurity over the last couple of years?
Sure. There's we were talking about this right before the presentation, but cyber insurance is definitely the big topic with all our clients. We've had a lot of clients locally get hit with different claims, both for-profit and nonprofit. And unfortunately, it's a very challenging market right now. Since there are so many claims out there, a lot of companies are increasing rates and taking, measures to kind of tweak the policies. So, on average, we're seeing 80 to 100% rate increases on policies for policies coming up for renewal. It's not out of the question to see, 200 to 300% increases. We have seen a big uptick. I don't have a percentage for you, but we have seen a big uptick in clients buying cyber coverage for the first time, over the past 2 to 3 years. And I think a lot of that's just driven by, horror stories of, hearing, friends or other organizations affected by, these types of claims. So people want to be prepared and, have some sort of backstop if something happens.
During my research for this morning, I came across a site that said the most pronounced cyber attacks, and list them since 2006, and it was like about 2 inches thick. And it's a lot of countries going against each other, besides the private companies. Have you seen a lot of that, Justin?
Yeah, and so there's a thing called the dark web, right? If you Google it, it'll talk about all the different attacks that we see. A lot of our engineers and architects use it to understand what's coming, to try to stay ahead of the curve. But 100%, I mean, everybody has a different reason why the attack, right? Some for money, some to take the IP, some to create products even cheaper for profit. But yeah, we're constantly seeing, those become more and more aggressive.
Now, have you seen the repetitive cyber criminals that repeat themselves and they come up and they take pride in what they do?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people in the call probably saw Anonymous, right? They're not a criminal. They actually go after bad people who try to pretend like they're them. You see them do really good things for the community, but yeah, people just change like their name or change the organization group, right? If they get caught or don't get paid their ransomware, they just recreate a new name or recreate a new attack or new piece of malware, and they're constantly sending it back out. A lot of people use automated bots, right? So a lot of times people will say, is the hacker sitting behind the computer? I think there's initially 3 or 4 of them behind, but they create these bots that go out and create attacks everywhere. They're trying to figure out where can we get in. Once those bots get in, then I believe they take over manual control to totally go after everything.
And not only have you seen, the sophisticated cyber criminals, but you see high school students, college students, and it's everywhere.
Yeah, you're right. One of the other questions was,
There's one in here. Is it common for hackers to fully return control of the system and data after ransoms have been paid? So it's interesting. What we found is they actually do return control almost every time. And the reason for that is because, I was talking about the vendors that cyber insurance companies can offer. There's a couple of vendors that specialize in negotiating that ransom payment, and they've told us that they run into the same groups over and over again that are demanding the ransoms. And if we pay the ransom payment through the policy and they don't return the data or the systems, then it's a breach of trust, I guess, but they know that they have a lower likelihood of having success for getting paid a similar ransom in the future. So it almost becomes a business transaction. And we found that they actually, once the ransom paid, they almost become your IT help desk and they kind of give you instructions for how to get your network back. So it's a little sick and twisted, but that's what we've seen.
Gentlemen, this is Jeff
Came up
Petula. There was a pretty interesting question that came across too. It was that the question for the panel was how do you balance between the usability / ease of use for your user base and security? Basically what the questioner is asking is, are making systems more secure usually means more difficulty for users with little technology experience. So how do you balance that? How do you have a very robust cybersecurity system many times dealing with those that have little experience in cybersecurity in companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways to address it, right? I know Will touched upon this too, and sort of Frank, you really have to educate your people, right? There's a lot of tools that are very lightweight. There's a tool called CrowdStrike right now, right? And a lot of people, when it first came out, said it's going to slow my computer down. The users are going to notice. Some of these new technologies coming out are so lightweight, you don't even know they're on your computer, right? When you're shutting your computer down, they're doing the update, or when it's hibernating in the evening, they do their updates, right? One of the things that Defy does is we have what's called a Defy Lab. A lot of our customers bring up this question and say, we don't want to add these new technologies because it's going to slow their user down. What we'll do is try to simulate their environment. Obviously, we don't have their production data, so I can't produce exactly what's happening. We can kind of show you as we add these different tools, does it slow down the machine? Majority of the time, we're not seeing it. The only thing I will say is we'll touch upon two-factor authentication. A lot of people will say, hey, it takes me an extra minute to log in because you have to put a password, then get a code and put it in. Our response is if your employee is kind of pushing back on putting that code in, I think you hired the wrong employee, right? As an employer, we're doing our job to protect everybody. If I don't protect my internal assets, basically there could be risk of all my employees losing their job. So it's really just an education thing to help them understand why we're taking the controls that we are and putting them in place. Because again, it protects the overall business.
It's so essential that whenever you create the preventative steps for cybersecurity or any other type of issue that your company has, it starts with your policies and procedures. Do you have those in place? you need to review those. You have to create them, but you should have policies in place in order to have preventative measures and assignments of individuals who are going to do certain things or contacts that are essential for you to make whenever something is breached or there's an issue with your database.
And Frank, that's an actually interesting question, because another question, or I'm sorry, interesting point, another question that came along the lines of that is that in a company, who would you suggest owns the task of mitigating the cyber threat? I mean, is it across the board, CEO down? How does that work? You know, and if for a lot of smaller companies, you know, which of course the chamber represents, you know, how would you recommend, you know, putting someone in charge of mitigating that risk, or do you spread it across departments, or, you know, what are your suggestions on that?
Well, I would say it depends on the size of the company, obviously. And the size of the company is going to depend on who's going to be that person, the go-to person who has to react and to make the contacts. But Justin, you know, you deal with, you know, small, medium-sized, and large companies, and what do you see?
Yeah, it's a good point Frank brings up. It really depends on the size too, but where we kind of see the conflict of interest come into play, as you get with smaller companies, nobody really wants to own it because they don't feel that they're at risk. And so one thing we encourage, there's different phishing tools that you can run an internal campaign. They're very minimal from a cost perspective. And basically they'll just send out an email request to see how many people will actually click on a link. We then take that data and go back and talk to the different owners of the different departments. And usually what you see is the higher up the individual or executive, more than none, they're the ones clicking on a link because they're moving so fast. They're just checking their email late at night. They get off a plane, they get in a car, and they're literally looking at their email, clicking on a link. The next thing you know, it activates that task. But it's really back to the education part and the policy part that Frank referenced. It's kind of like, you've got to educate them on, here's what takes place, here's why we have to do it. But usually once you can show them that, I mean, even a 3-person shop, right? If you have property, you have customer data, you have social security numbers, you're at risk. Those are valuable to somebody.
Now, we've seen and we've been part of, depending on the size of the company, if it's a medium-sized or large-sized company, just like sexual harassment training, that we do cybersecurity training so that they're aware of, you know, what needs to be done. And Justin, you guys do this all the time, and educate the individuals and the employees. You know, the employees have to be trained. They have to have that understanding as to what it is, what it means, and what to do.
Yeah.
What do you
Because I
find?
think the question that came up about locking things down and making systems hard, right? If we can educate, that's less controls you have to put in place. Yes, you have to put controls in place, but a lot of times they do become mundane and they do slow productivity down. But I think if we do a good job at educating and helping people understand our policies, we don't have to basically go all the way down where we have to lock things down so we can't send documentation outside the environment.
This may seem like a very basic question, but what do you see are the most, the easiest way that these hackers are getting in? Is it just something like you said, just clicking on something you don't understand or recognize, or what's the most common thing that our viewers can be on the lookout for?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I would say there's thousands and thousands of avenues, right? I mean, the target breach was through an HVAC unit that was connected to the internal modem and internet at Target, right? Which nobody would have thought that. That's why it wasn't locked down. Something that substantial all the way to basically, there was another one in Tennessee. We're working with the customer now, but basically the admin left her computer unlocked. A delivery person came in who was non-delivery person, just had a hat and a shirt on that they worked or represented a delivery firm. They literally sat at the computer. They initiated a few things, sent a couple of files out. So it's all over the map, right? People leave their computer unlocked at a Starbucks. People leave their phone unlocked at a coffee shop. It's simple things of not locking down the device with the Control-Alt-Delete, just putting it in protection mode.
Will, what are you seeing on your side of the claims that your company's writing policies for and the claims that are coming in?
Yeah, I think there's been a big rise in the social engineering attacks, which would be going back to that example of, you know, getting an email from the CEO or the CFO asking to wire money out somewhere. We've unfortunately seen a lot of clients have that situation where, you know, $100,000 gets wired out and they don't realize it for a week or two, and then the money's gone. And so I think that goes back to the training. But I think, you know, unfortunately in today's world, you know, everyone has a LinkedIn profile. So, you know, every business has a website. It's easy for hackers and criminals to kind of put the pieces together to figure out who the key people are in the organization, and then, you know, try to set up a an email account that looks really similar to that person's email and start asking employees to, send payments somewhere. So I think, training and vigilance is, really key from that standpoint.
You know what they say is, if you get a text message and it sounds too good to be true, don't click on it.
Yeah.
There's one question that we have up is, why have cyber attacks increased so substantially over time?
I mean, I'll give my opinion on that, Will, and I'll be interested to see yours. I think too, it's kind of the question that always comes up when there's a breach is, should we pay the ransomware, right? And so there's both sides of the table of the argument, right? It's kind of like if you pay it, it creates bad behavior, right? Then the group understands, hey, if we continue to do this, we're going to continually get paid. But I think the main reason that we see it is they're so successful in doing it, right? They're gaining access to what they need to become profitable or to create something that creates a profit. So I think as long as the avenues are still there, they're going to continue to try to find those to be profitable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a challenging argument because, with the policies in place, they know that there's coverage out there for companies to pay that ransom. So I think there's a big debate right now in our space, about whether you should make that payment or not. And I think the prevailing thought right now is you still should make the ransom payment, but there was a press release or an article from the FBI, I think last year, where they recommended the companies don't make the payment because it's encouraging that bad behavior. So it's definitely a delicate balance.
Now, Will, just for the audience to understand, if you're a small company, medium-sized company, or large company, what type of policy payments does cybersecurity insurance entail?
Sure. So really the base policy is typically $1 million policy limit, and the policies are rated on the type of industry that you're in. So are you a nonprofit? Are you a manufacturer? Are you a financial institution? And then it's also based on your annual revenues. So for a really small company or organization, your policy premium might be $1,000, $2,500. If you're a mid-sized business or, a larger business, I mean, you could be looking at something, substantially more than that. But I think, the best thing you can do is, talk to a broker. You can reach out to us if you'd like, and have someone who could do that competitive analysis for you and go out to different companies and, make a recommendation on what's the most comprehensive from a price and coverage standpoint.
Thanks, Will. And as we try to wrap things up, one question that comes to mind, Justin, is that have you seen the government becoming more involved, or do you have any opinions as to should the government become more involved, because this is becoming so far an issue and a very pricey issue for companies?
Yeah, that's an interesting statement. I'm going to tread very lightly on the response because I think we're all trying to work together to kind of protect all of the assets for all of our customers. But one of the things that we see is what our customers have from a budget perspective. It's constantly increasing year over year over year. Eventually, it's going to get to the point where they're spending, more than they can put out to protect their assets. I think what we'll see is some of the policies that the government has put out there to protect each of the customers in things steps they have to take to put into play to protect. But I think we're going to have to see something, because eventually it's getting so expensive. The adversaries have way more money to throw at attacks than I think we, as the consumers, have to protect. So I think they're going to have to step up to the plate and put some controls in place, because otherwise it's completely, I don't want to say it's out of whack, but what you see some of these large corporations spending $2 and $3 billion a year to protect, and they're still not fully protected, meaning there's still something open where they could get in. It's concerning, right? Especially as a business owner, right? It's like, how much more do we have to invest to protect if we can't get to 100%? I think we're going to see more of a partnership come out, because otherwise it's kind of like, everybody's trying to fight together. We're going to need that support.
Hey, gentlemen,
Any final closing comments?
Gentlemen, I see we have one interesting question left, and I would like your thoughts on this. That has the rise in remote work created additional security risks or even a spike in cyber attacks? That's an interesting question.
And I've
think it
received a lot of
definitely
phone
has.
calls that remote work is not as protective as those who are in the office. And there's more access to computers and devices at home than they are in the office.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, Will?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely has. I think Justin touched on it earlier when he said that you could you could be in a Starbucks and be doing work. So I think what we've seen is whether it's a Starbucks or staying in a hotel, if you're logging into the internet through an unprotected network, you're exposing your company to different attacks that they might not face if you were coming into the office every day.
Justin, what do you see as protective measures in order to assure that the company isn't as vulnerable with those working remotely?
Yes, I mean, there's a couple of different technologies that you can put on the devices. And a lot of times people think my device is only being protected when it's connected to the internet. But there's some technologies that will push policies and keep policies active even when you get off the internet. So say you sit down at a Starbucks or a coffee shop or some random place, and unfortunately you do connect to something of a virus, right? It'll stop and protect from that point on. And it's just another step that we talk to our customers of as the remote force continues to grow. And I think it's going to continue to evolve, right? Because younger generations want the flexibility to basically live wherever, travel, but also work full time. So I think as corporations adopt more of that, I think we're seeing a lot of customers try to push people back into the office. But some of your larger places such as Google, Facebook, and these bigger tech companies really don't care where you work. So I think we're going to see additional controls put in place to protect as people become so mobile.
And Will, one last comment for you is, have you seen that impacting the insurance cost for cyber insurance?
Yeah, I think as part of that application I was talking about, it outlines different policies and procedures your organization has, and the companies are definitely asking questions around that. And I think depending on the responses, it could impact the policy premium. But we're also starting to see certain baseline requirements where they might require a company to have two-factor authentication in place before they'll even offer a quote. So it's an evolving landscape, but we just try to educate clients as best we can and find good solutions for them.
Well, Jeff, thanks so much for having us, and we really appreciate the audience's involvement and participation.
This was an excellent discussion, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. I know I learned a lot from being with you. I'd like to thank again Frank Botta from the Lynch Law Group, Justin Jomachowski from Defy, and Will Simpson from Simpson McCready for being with us today. Thank you so much for your knowledge and expertise, and we certainly look forward to working with you on this important topic for our members. So again, on behalf of the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, we thank you for being with us this morning, and have a wonderful business day in Washington County. Thank you.